vanished without a trace. The mystery of Flight MH370 and its 239 lost souls. The ocean has always been humanity's final frontier, a place of beauty and of silence. For centuries, it has swallowed ships, explorers, and secrets without ever returning them. But in 2014, it claimed something larger than anyone could imagine, a modern airliner filled with 239 people flying on a clear night, simply vanished. No distress call, no warning, no debris floating in the sea, just a ghost on the radar, and then nothing. The disappearance of Flight MH370 is more than an aviation mystery. It is a question that haunts the modern age. How, in a world of satellites, GPS, and endless surveillance, can something so vast, so filled with life, simply slip away? Some say the ocean took it. Others whisper of hijackings, conspiracies, and forces beyond our understanding. But one truth echoes through it all. When you step into the sky, you step into the unknown. And sometimes the unknown does not let go. Tonight, we open the vault of shadows and search for the truth inside the greatest aviation mystery of our time, the vanishing of Flight MH370. March 8, 2014. A Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew takes off from Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. Just hours later, it vanishes. No distress call, no wreckage, no answers. What happened to Flight MH370 has become one of the greatest mysteries in modern history, a story of families left in the dark, investigators chasing shadows, and a trail of theories that only deepen the questions. This is the unsolved disappearance of Flight MH370. 239 people, one plane, no answers. The flight that never arrived. It was just past midnight on March 8, 2014, when Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 prepared for departure from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The Boeing 777 sat gleaming on the tarmac, engines humming as final checks were completed. Inside the departure hall, 227 passengers and 12 crew members made their way through boarding gates, some rolling suitcases, some carrying sleeping children, others clutching passports and boarding passes. For them, it was just another flight, a routine red-eye across the South China Sea to Beijing. A 6-hour journey they had no reason to fear. But this flight would never arrive. Among those boarding was a young Chinese couple on holiday, exhausted but smiling. A group of students returning to Beijing after a semester abroad. Business executives carrying laptops and briefcases. Entire families traveling together, excited for reunions. Each person with a story, a destination, and an expectation that they would land safely in the morning. At the controls was Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a respected veteran pilot with over 18,000 flight hours. Colleagues described him as meticulous, calm, and deeply experienced. By his side sat First Officer Farrick Abdul Hamid, only 27, still early in his career, but eager to prove himself. Between them, the cockpit was in capable hands. At 12:41 a.m., Flight MH370 lifted off the runway and soared into the night sky. For the first hour, everything appeared perfectly normal. Air traffic controllers monitored the plane as it climbed, leveled off, and cruised toward the South China Sea. The passengers settled in. Some drifted to sleep, others opened books, headphones, or in-flight entertainment. Nothing suggested that anything was wrong. But then something changed. At 1:21 a.m., less than an hour after takeoff, MH370 vanished from civilian radar. The transponder, a device that constantly signals the plane's location and altitude, went silent. Air traffic controllers tried to make contact, but the cockpit was silent. One moment, MH370 was a glowing, moving steadily across the radar screen. The next, it was gone. A Boeing 777 gone, without a trace. At first, controllers believed it might be a technical glitch. Systems fail, signals drop. But minutes turned into hours, and Beijing prepared for an arrival that never came. Families gathered at the airport, scanning the arrivals board. Flight MH370, delayed. The minutes dragged on. Confusion spread. Phones rang unanswered. By dawn, it was clear. Flight MH370 had not arrived anywhere. No distress call. No wreckage. No signal. Nothing. The unimaginable had happened. In the 21st century, an advanced jetliner carrying 239 people had simply vanished into thin air. And this was only the beginning. As dawn broke over Asia on March 8, 2014, the waiting families in Beijing began to realize something was terribly wrong. The arrivals board still showed Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 as delayed. But the minutes had stretched into hours. There had been no updates, no announcements, no reassuring words from the airline, just silence. At first, there was confusion. Airports are no strangers to delays. But as the sun climbed higher, a darker mood took hold. Mothers cradled children who asked why their fathers hadn't come through the gate. Husbands gripped cell phones, calling numbers that rang endlessly. Elderly parents stood frozen, staring at the board, hoping for a change that never came. In Kuala Lumpur, air traffic controllers were scrambling. A commercial aircraft doesn't just disappear. Not in an age of satellite tracking, radar, and instant communication. They reached out to nearby airspaces. Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore. But none of them had seen the flight. It was as if the plane had stepped off the grid entirely. By mid-morning, the Malaysian government called an emergency press conference. Officials confirmed the unthinkable. Flight MH370 was missing. And the world reacted with shock. News alerts spread across Asia within hours, then across the globe. Malaysia Airlines flight missing. Boeing 777 vanishes over sea. The headlines were impossible to believe. A plane carrying 239 people had vanished without a single trace. The search began immediately. At first, ships and aircraft were dispatched to the South China Sea, where the flight had last been seen. Naval vessels from Malaysia and Vietnam combed the waters. Planes flew low over the ocean, their crews scanning the waves for any floating debris. Families clung to hope that wreckage would be spotted quickly, and the story would end with survivors pulled from the sea. But the ocean was empty. No oil slicks. No floating life vests. No sign of anything at all. Back in Beijing, families were herded into hotel conference rooms, guarded by airline staff and police. Journalists pressed at the doors. Inside, the scenes were heartbreaking. Mothers sobbing, fathers demanding answers, brothers and sisters shouting at airline representatives, furious at the lack of information. Some refused to leave the airport, waiting for the impossible, that the doors would slide open and their loved ones would walk through alive. And yet, as hours became days, one word grew louder in the halls of newsrooms and in the whispers of grieving families. How could a massive, modern jetliner vanish in the year 2014? A time when satellites watch every corner of the Earth, when phones can track a person's location to within meters. How could 239 people simply disappear? The mystery had only just begun. As international search teams expanded operations, tensions grew. Conflicting reports surfaced. Was the plane lost over the South China Sea? Or had it turned back toward Malaysia? Were radar signals being misread or deliberately withheld?
For the families, it was a living nightmare. Some clung to hope that their loved ones were alive, perhaps hijacked, perhaps stranded somewhere unknown. Others began to accept the worst. In the days following the disappearance, images of anguished families filled screens around the world. Tear-streaked faces. Children holding photographs. Relatives collapsing in grief as officials failed to provide answers. The story was no longer just a missing flight. It had become a human tragedy. The world was watching, and the pressure was rising. Authorities needed answers. The families needed closure. But the ocean gave up no secrets. And each day that passed without evidence deepened the mystery. What began as a routine flight had now become a global obsession, a haunting puzzle that would stretch far beyond the first frantic hours. And as the search widened, investigators would uncover something chilling. MH370 had not just disappeared, it had changed course. The search becomes a mystery. The first 48 hours of the investigation were critical and chaotic. Malaysia Airlines had declared flight MH370 missing. Search teams scoured the South China Sea. Families in Beijing and Kuala Lumpur clung to televisions, desperate for updates. But then, on the third day, everything changed. Radar data, quietly reviewed by the Malaysian military, revealed something extraordinary. MH370 had not continued toward Beijing. It had not disappeared over the South China Sea. Instead, it had turned back. At 1:21 a.m., just moments after its last routine communication, the aircraft's transponder, the system that tells air traffic controllers where a plane is, was switched off. Not failed. Not malfunctioned. Switched off. From that moment, the flight became invisible to civilian radar. But military radar, operating on a different frequency, caught a ghostly trace. MH370 had banked sharply west, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula and out toward the Andaman Sea. This was not just an accident. This was deliberate. The revelation stunned investigators. If the plane had suffered a catastrophic failure, it would not have turned back so sharply, nor flown for hours afterward. Someone either in the cockpit or through a hijacking had taken control. The search zone expanded overnight. From a narrow stretch of the South China Sea, it now spanned thousands of miles, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. Ships, planes, and satellites were all redirected. What had begun as a rescue mission was transforming into something else entirely, a hunt for truth in an ocean of lies. Meanwhile, the families watched in horror. First, they were told the plane might have gone down in the South China Sea. Then, days later, officials admitted it could have been anywhere, thousands of miles away. Anger boiled over. Relatives accused Malaysia Airlines and the government of withholding information. "What aren't you telling us?" they shouted at press briefings. Some families even accused the authorities of lying outright. And then, the media storm began. Across the world, theories exploded. Some claimed the plane had been hijacked by terrorists. Others suggested a shadowy government operation. Was it shot down by accident? Hidden on a secret military base? Or was it something even more sinister, a pilot who turned his plane into a flying tomb? Every hour, new speculation filled the airwaves. But the one fact no one could deny was this: Flight MH370 had been deliberately diverted. Yet the mystery only deepened. Satellites operated by a British company, Inmarsat, detected faint handshakes, pings between the aircraft and satellites long after the plane vanished from radar. These signals suggested the aircraft had continued flying for up to 7 more hours. 7 hours in the dark, somewhere over the Indian Ocean. But to where? Toward Australia? Toward Africa? Or into the unending emptiness of the sea? Search crews faced an impossible challenge. The Indian Ocean is one of the most remote and hostile environments on Earth. Waves tower stories high. Depths plunge to over 20,000 feet. Searching it was like looking for a single grain of sand in an endless desert. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the scale of the disaster and the possibility of a cover-up grew darker. Was this the work of a lone pilot? A hijacking crew? Or an international conspiracy cloaked in silence? The families had no answers. The world had no answers. And the more investigators revealed, the stranger it became. This was no longer just a missing plane. It was now one of the greatest mysteries of the modern age and perhaps one of the greatest crimes. By now, the world was hooked. News channels ran 24/7 coverage. Families begged for answers. Investigators searched desperately. But with no wreckage, no black boxes, and no survivors, there was only one thing left: theories. And the theories surrounding Flight MH370 grew darker by the day. The first, and perhaps most controversial, pointed directly to the cockpit. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a 53-year-old veteran pilot with over 18,000 hours of flying experience, came under intense scrutiny. Investigators discovered that Zahari had used his home flight simulator to practice long flights over the Indian Ocean, eerily similar to the suspected path of MH370. Was it possible the captain deliberately took his passengers to their deaths? Could MH370 have been a carefully planned suicide mission? Supporters of this theory point to other tragedies, like the Germanwings crash of 2015, when a co-pilot locked his captain out of the cockpit and flew his plane into the French Alps. Or Silk Air Flight 185, another suspected pilot suicide. But Zahari's family and friends fiercely rejected this idea. They described him as kind, devoted to his children, and deeply professional. To them, blaming the captain was a betrayal, a convenient scapegoat for a mystery that governments could not solve. Another theory spread quickly: hijacking. Some experts suggested that terrorists, or perhaps a small group of passengers, had stormed the cockpit and seized control of the aircraft. But there was a problem: no terrorist group ever claimed responsibility. In the world of terrorism, claiming credit is often the point. To vanish without a word was strange. Too strange. Could it have been a state-sponsored operation? Some whispered about shadowy intelligence agencies. Others suggested the plane was diverted to a secret military base. Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean was often named. But the U.S. denied any involvement, dismissing the claims as wild speculation. Of course, not every theory required human malice. Some argued MH370 may have suffered a catastrophic failure, a slow decompression that rendered everyone unconscious. The plane, still on autopilot, could have drifted for hours until fuel ran out, crashing silently into the ocean. This theory, called the ghost flight, had precedent. In 1999, golfer Payne Stewart's private jet lost cabin pressure, killing all on board as it flew on autopilot for hours before crashing. But if this were true, why was the transponder turned off? Why the sharp turn back over Malaysia? Those actions suggested intent, not accident. Perhaps the most chilling theory was whispered in hushed tones: that MH370 had been shot down accidentally or deliberately, and governments were hiding the truth. Some pointed to the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 just months later, struck by a missile over Ukraine. If one plane could be destroyed in secrecy, could MH370 have suffered the same fate? Others claimed satellite images, military radar data, and international pressure were being concealed. That somewhere, someone knew the truth, but the public would never be told. And then, of course, came the outliers. Aliens. Wormholes. Abduction into another dimension. As bizarre as they sound, the sheer impossibility of the disappearance made even the strangest ideas find believers. After all, if a massive Boeing 777 could vanish without a trace, what else was possible? Theories piled up, but none answered the family's most urgent question: where are our loved ones? For every theory, there were holes. For every explanation, new contradictions arose. The lack of wreckage, the silence of the black boxes, the conflicting data, it was as if the ocean itself was conspiring to keep its secrets. And as weeks turned into months, something finally broke the silence. A piece of debris, thousands of miles away, would wash ashore. And with it, a new chapter in the mystery would begin. 4 months after Flight MH370's disappearance, the world searched in vain. Planes swept the skies. Ships dragged sonar equipment across the seabed. Satellites scanned endless waves. But the ocean remained silent. Then, in July 2015, nearly a year and a half after MH370 vanished, hope stirred. On the French island of Réunion, east of Madagascar, a piece of aircraft wreckage washed ashore. Locals discovered a flaperon, part of a Boeing 777's wing. The barnacle-encrusted debris was carefully studied, and the conclusion shocked the world: it belonged to MH370. For the first time, there was physical proof. The plane had indeed ended in the Indian Ocean. Families wept. Some with grief, some with anger. For many, the wreckage confirmed the loss of loved ones. But for others, it only raised more questions. Why had it taken over a year for anything to appear? Where was the rest of the plane? And why here, thousands of miles from the original search zones? The discovery set off a frenzy. More pieces soon appeared. A fragment of a horizontal stabilizer in Mozambique. An engine cowling in South Africa. Interior paneling in Mauritius. All confirmed as parts of MH370. Each fragment scattered across the western Indian Ocean like breadcrumbs from a ghost. But the more debris that surfaced, the more troubling the story became. Some experts pointed out the barnacle growth on the flaperon. The pattern suggested the wreckage hadn't floated freely for a year; it may have been submerged, hidden, before surfacing later. Was someone planting evidence? Or had currents simply carried the fragments in unpredictable ways? The families were divided. Some clung to the debris as closure, proof that their loved ones were gone. Others believed it was a smokescreen, carefully staged to end the search. At one press conference, a grieving mother shouted at officials, "Don't show me pieces of a plane. Show me my son.
Meanwhile, investigators faced their own nightmare.
The Flatbrand confirmed MH370 had ended in the Indian Ocean, but it told them nothing about why.
The black boxes, with their vital recordings of cockpit voices and flight data, remained hidden in the depths. Without them, every theory was still on the table. And then came the false leads. Satellite images identified dozens of supposed debris fields, floating objects that turned out to be fishing nets, driftwood, even garbage. Fishermen reported strange sightings. Some claimed to have seen a low-flying plane the night MH370 vanished. Others reported hearing loud booms over the ocean. None of these leads led to answers. The search cost billions.
It became the most expensive in aviation history.
Australia, Malaysia, and China poured resources into combing the seabed with advanced sonar. At one point, search vessels mapped an area the size of the United Kingdom, yet they found nothing but volcanic ridges and the silence of the deep. And with each passing month, public faith in the investigation eroded. Critics accused officials of incompetence, even corruption.
Families believed governments knew more than they were admitting. Conspiracy theories flourished, and with each new fragment of wreckage, the question only grew louder. Were we being told the truth? Because if MH370 had crashed where the data suggested, then why had so little been found?
A plane that size, 239 people, thousands of seats, luggage, cargo, should have left far more evidence. Instead, only fragments emerged. Just enough to confirm the tragedy, but never enough to explain it. The debris provided closure for some. But for others, it was nothing more than a cruel trick of the ocean, or perhaps, of human hands. And as the official search dragged on, it became clear, answers were not at the surface. They lay hidden, deep beneath the waves, in one of the harshest and most mysterious places on Earth.
The hunt for MH370 was about to descend into the abyss.
The debris scattered across the western Indian Ocean proved one thing: Flight MH370 had met its fate somewhere in those waters.
But the ocean guards its secrets jealously.
To uncover them, investigators would have to descend into one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The Indian Ocean's southern reaches are a graveyard of storms. Swells rise like walls of moving steel.
Winds scream across the surface, bending ships and battering crews.
And below, the sea floor plunges to unimaginable depths, a jagged landscape of underwater mountains, trenches, and volcanic ridges.
This was the place MH370 was believed to rest. Somewhere in a search zone stretching across 120,000 square kilometers, an area nearly the size of Greece.
Australia, Malaysia, and China launched the most expensive and advanced search in aviation history. Specialist ships from around the world converged on the waters west of Australia. They towed sonar scanners across the seabed, painting ghostly images of the terrain below.
Autonomous underwater vehicles, robotic subs, and deep-sea drones plunged into the darkness.
Every day, crews pored over sonar maps that revealed an alien world.
Vast canyons, volcano-like cones, sheer cliffs plunging into blackness.
They found shipwrecks from centuries past, rusting skeletons of forgotten vessels.
But of Flight MH370, there was nothing.
The ocean remained silent.
Weeks turned into months. Months into years. Billions were spent. Tens of thousands of square miles were mapped. Yet no fuselage. No engines. No black boxes. No seats, no luggage, no bodies. Only emptiness.
And that emptiness became more terrifying than any wreckage could have been.
Search crews described the atmosphere on board as heavy with dread.
Each time sonar scans returned blank, the mystery deepened.
Some began to whisper, "Are we even looking in the right place?" Experts debated furiously.
The satellite pings that suggested MH370's path were re-examined, recalculated, reinterpreted. Some insisted the plane had flown farther south. Others believed the wreck lay north, closer to the equator. Every adjustment shifted the search zone by hundreds of miles. Meanwhile, the United States, with its powerful satellites and radar systems, was suspiciously quiet.
If American satellites could spot license plates from space, why hadn't they tracked a giant Boeing 777?
Critics argued that Washington knew more than it admitted, but kept silent for political reasons.
Australia, tasked with leading much of the deep-sea search, faced its own backlash. Billions were spent mapping the ocean floor, yet nothing was found.
Some accused Australia of directing search efforts into the wrong areas, deliberately or otherwise. And then there was the global blame game.
Every major country pointed fingers. Malaysia blamed conflicting radar data. China blamed poor coordination. Australia blamed unreliable satellite signals. Boeing and Malaysia Airlines pointed at each other.
The result was a chorus of confusion and, for the families, unbearable betrayal.
What was supposed to be a united global search had become a political circus.
The lack of cooperation led to suspicions of cover-up.
Could a military accident be hiding behind the mystery? Had one nation's defenses shot down MH370, mistaking it for a threat, and now the truth was being buried to prevent war? Theories spread like wildfire.
Some journalists pointed to parallels with Korean Air Flight 007, shot down by Soviet jets in 1983, or Iran Air Flight 655, destroyed by a U.S. missile in 1988. In both cases, governments denied responsibility until undeniable evidence emerged. Could MH370 be history repeating itself, only this time, with the wreckage still hidden? Each time officials denied wrongdoing, each time they failed to provide answers, suspicion grew. For the families, the words cover-up became impossible to ignore. One father of a missing passenger put it bluntly in an interview. "If it was an accident, they'd have told us. If it was a failure, they'd have shown us. The only reason for silence is guilt." The world had moved from sympathy to suspicion. What began as a tragedy was now seen by many as a crime, not just of a missing plane, but of governments that may have betrayed the truth. And as pressure mounted, the mystery of MH370 entered a darker phase, not just about what happened in the skies, but what was being hidden on the ground. In the absence of truth, theories rise like smoke, some rational, others unthinkable. For Flight MH370, the void left by unanswered questions became fertile ground for speculation. From scientific models to shadowy conspiracies, each theory reflects humanity's struggle to explain the inexplicable. Perhaps the most chilling and divisive theory centers on Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with over 18,000 flight hours. Investigators uncovered unusual details, a flight simulator in his home that contained a route eerily similar to MH370's suspected path into the Indian Ocean. Could Zahari have practiced the crash beforehand? Some experts point to a deliberate climb to 45,000 feet early in the flight, high enough to render passengers unconscious in minutes if cabin pressure was lost. If true, the maneuver suggests a methodical, calculated plan. But others who knew Zahari describe him as a loving father, a respected pilot, and a man with no history of instability. Could such a person truly doom 239 souls? This theory divides families to this day, between those who see Zahari as a culprit, and those who see him as a scapegoat. Another theory suggests MH370 was hijacked either by passengers, crew, or external actors. The sudden turn off course, the silence of the radios, the deactivation of transponders, all hallmarks of a hostile takeover. Some point to the fact that 2 passengers boarded with stolen passports, though later investigation revealed no links to terrorism. Still, in the post-9/11 world, hijacking cannot be dismissed. Could the plane have been flown toward a secret landing site, or even used in a planned attack that was thwarted before reaching its target? No wreckage supporting this theory has ever been found. But absence of proof has not silenced it. Perhaps the most controversial theory is that MH370 was destroyed by mistake. What if it wandered into a sensitive military zone? What if a miscommunication or false radar identification led to its destruction? Supporters of this theory point to history: Korean Air Flight 007, Iran Air 655. Both civilian planes, both shot down by military forces. Both initially denied. Could MH370 be another tragic entry in this grim list, but one buried under international secrecy to avoid conflict? The lack of wreckage fuels suspicion. If governments know where it fell, why hide it? Unless the truth is too damaging to reveal. Some experts favor a simpler explanation: a sudden, catastrophic failure. A fire in the avionics bay, a rapid decompression, or a power failure could have incapacitated the crew. The plane, on autopilot, may have flown until fuel exhaustion sent it plunging into the ocean. This theory accounts for the silence and the lack of distress calls. But critics argue, why then the strange course changes? Why the deliberate seeming turns? If it was mechanical failure, why did the aircraft travel for 7 long hours instead of crashing immediately? And then come the theories that live on the edge of imagination. Some claim the plane was hijacked remotely, part of a secret military experiment. Others suggest it was diverted to Diego Garcia, a U.S. naval base, and destroyed to cover up sensitive cargo. Still others whisper of espionage, stolen technology, or even extraterrestrial involvement. To skeptics, these theories sound absurd. To believers, they fill the silence left by officials and investigators. And in the absence of hard evidence, even the most improbable explanations find a home. Each theory carries weight. Each has holes. None has provided closure. The pilot is villain. The hijackers in the shadows. The military accident, hidden behind red tape. The mechanical failure, cruel but natural. The conspiracies, outlandish yet persistent. Like pieces of a puzzle scattered across oceans, these theories reflect not just possibilities, but the desperate human need for answers. Because when 239 people vanish without explanation, the world cannot help but ask, what if? And until the wreckage is found, until the black boxes speak, theories will live on, haunting the silence where truth should be. Years have passed since the night flight MH370 vanished. And yet, the echoes remain unanswered questions, grieving families, and a mystery that refuses to fade into history. For the relatives of the 239 souls, time has not healed. Some still wait by their phones, hoping for news that will never come. Others have built shrines, quiet corners of remembrance, where birthdays and anniversaries are honored in silence. The absence has become its own presence, a shadow that walks beside them every day. For investigators, MH370 has been a riddle wrapped in contradictions. Each clue seems to dissolve under scrutiny. Radar trails, satellite pings, fragments of debris, they hint at truth but never confirm it. Like the ocean itself, the case swallows more than it reveals. For governments, the disappearance exposed cracks in trust. Nations bickered, blamed, and stumbled. Transparency was promised but never fully delivered. Was it incompetence, or was it something darker? The suspicion remains. And for the aviation world, MH370 became a turning point. Regulations changed. Cockpit doors, tracking systems, satellite links all improved in the wake of the loss. It is a bitter irony. Only after 239 lives were taken did the world act to make skies safer. But the haunting questions endure. Did a man with decades of service betray the trust of all on board? Did a hijacker slip through unnoticed, vanishing into the clouds? Did a government mistake MH370 for a threat and bury the truth to avoid war? Or did nature and machine, in cruel alliance, bring about catastrophe without warning? Each theory speaks to something deeper: our fear of the unknown, our suspicion of authority, our desperate need for answers when faced with silence. And in that silence lies the true power of MH370. Because unlike other tragedies, this one offers no closure, no final chapter. Only fragments, only possibilities. The legacy of MH370 is not only the loss of 239 lives, it is the chilling reminder that in our modern world of satellites, smartphones, and instant information, a massive jetliner can still vanish without a trace. The skies, it seems, are not as certain as we believe. And so, the story of MH370 lives on not as a solved case, but as one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. A tragedy. A crime, perhaps. And a riddle that may never give up its answer. When MH370 vanished into the night sky, it didn't just disappear from radar, it slipped into one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, the Indian Ocean. To understand why the mystery endures, we must first understand the stage upon which it played out. The Indian Ocean stretches more than 70 million square kilometers, larger than the entire continent of Africa. It is remote, isolated, and bordered by some of the most sparsely populated coastlines on the planet. Few ships cross its southern reaches. Even fewer planes fly above it. It is, in many ways, the least explored ocean on Earth. Beneath its waves lie vast trenches and mountain ranges taller than Everest, but inverted, plunging miles below the surface. Scientists estimate that less than 20% of the Indian Ocean's seafloor has been properly mapped. The rest is blank, uncharted, unknowable. For a plane to vanish here is almost poetic. In the skies above, we expect precision radar, satellites, constant surveillance. But below, the ocean still belongs to darkness. MH370 is not the first mystery swallowed by the sea. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 crashed into the Atlantic. For years, no one knew where it had gone. It took over 2 years to locate its black boxes, lying 13,000 feet below the surface. And that was in the Atlantic, an ocean more heavily trafficked and more thoroughly studied than the Indian. Go back further, and you find ships that disappeared without trace, the Mary Celeste, found adrift with no crew, the countless vessels lost in the Bermuda Triangle, submarines that went down and were never recovered. The sea is not just a graveyard, it is a vault. For MH370, the Indian Ocean became that vault. The search for MH370 wasn't like looking for a needle in a haystack. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of a continent, while the haystack kept moving. Debris drifts. Currents swirl. Waves carry wreckage thousands of miles in unpredictable patterns. By the time the first confirmed fragment of MH370, a wing flaperon, washed up on the shores of Réunion Island in 2015, it had likely traveled across thousands of kilometers of shifting waters. And the depths? The suspected crash zone lies in waters more than 15,000 feet deep. At that depth, the pressure can crush steel like paper. Temperatures hover near freezing. Sunlight never touches the bottom. Only specialized submersibles and sonar equipment can operate there, and even then, success is not guaranteed. Search crews spent years combing the seabed with advanced sonar. They mapped tens of thousands of square kilometers of terrain never before seen by human eyes. They discovered undersea volcanoes, ridges, and deep valleys, a hidden world untouched for millions of years.
But they did not find MH370. The ocean holds the answers. Somewhere in its depths lie the black boxes, the fuselage, the evidence that could tell us once and for all what happened. But the ocean also guards those answers jealously. Each year, currents scatter potential wreckage further. Barnacles grow on debris, erasing signs of impact. Salt water corrodes metal until even large fragments can become unrecognizable. The Indian Ocean is not just the scene of the crime. It is the perfect accomplice, swallowing evidence, silencing witnesses, and stretching the patience of investigators beyond breaking. For the families, the sea has become both hope and torment. Hope, because somewhere within it lies the truth. Torment, because that truth remains just beyond reach. Some relatives have stood on the shores of the Indian Ocean, casting flowers into the waves, whispering prayers to the deep. Others curse it, calling it the thief that took their loved ones and hid them forever. For investigators, the ocean represents the limits of human control. We can track planes by satellite, communicate instantly across continents, and land probes on Mars, but when a plane falls into the Indian Ocean, it may as well fall into oblivion. And so, the ocean remains the greatest player in the MH370 mystery. It is the silent witness to what happened on March 8, 2014. It holds the black boxes, the wreckage, the final moments of 239 lives. But until it yields its secrets, the Indian Ocean will remain what it has always been, a place where answers sink and mysteries rise. Chapter 12: The Families Left Behind. When Flight MH370 vanished, it was not just a plane that disappeared, it was 239 lives, each tethered to families, friends, and communities who suddenly found themselves facing an abyss. For most tragedies, however unbearable, there is at least closure, a body to bury, a sight to mourn, a ceremony to mark the end. For MH370's families, there was none of this. Instead, they were given silence. Weeks passed, then months, and still no wreckage, no black boxes, no confirmation of death. Loved ones were declared missing, not gone, not alive, but suspended in a limbo of uncertainty. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss, a grief so cruel that it freezes healing. Parents kept children's rooms untouched. Wives slept with phones on their pillows, waiting for calls that would never come. A mother of one missing passenger said, "I don't know if I'm a mother still. I don't know if my son is dead or alive. Every night, I imagine him calling out for me." In Kuala Lumpur, Beijing, and beyond, candlelight vigils became a regular ritual. Families gathered in public squares, holding photos of smiling faces that had boarded MH370 and never returned. But as time wore on, grief turned into anger. In Beijing, relatives of Chinese passengers stormed press conferences, shouting at officials they accused of lying. "Tell us the truth," they cried, their voices echoing across international news. Outside Malaysian embassies, protests erupted, accusing the government of corruption, incompetence, and cover-up. Some families even went on hunger strikes, demanding answers. Others traveled across the world,
following every rumor of wreckage, desperate for even a single fragment.
The wreckage remains unseen.
The answers remain buried. And the Indian Ocean keeps its silence. For centuries, every crime has shared one foundation: evidence.
A broken lock, a weapon, a fingerprint, a body. But what happens when the evidence is swallowed whole? When the crime scene itself disappears? This is the chilling reality of MH370. If it was an accident, the lack of wreckage is tragic. But if it was deliberate, then it may be the perfect crime. Investigators always begin with the question of motive. In the case of MH370, several theories emerged. Personal desperation. Could one of the pilots have orchestrated a murder-suicide? Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was scrutinized for his personal life and political affiliations. Some claimed he had practiced similar flight paths on a home simulator. Political statement. Others suggested hijacking as a form of protest, a message aimed at governments. But if so, why no claim of responsibility? Financial desperation. Was there a passenger or group with debts, enemies, or secrets? The plane carried a mix of Chinese business leaders, tourists, and students. Some conspiracy theorists pointed to sensitive cargo on board. And yet, for every theory, there is a hole. No ransom demand. No manifesto. No clear beneficiary. The opportunity, however, is undeniable. When MH370 turned off its transponder and communications systems, it essentially vanished from civilian radar. In that moment, the plane entered a gray zone between military and civilian detection, a blind spot in global surveillance. If this was a hijacking or sabotage, the perpetrators exploited that window perfectly. Unlike crimes on land, there were no security cameras, no neighbors, no cell phones recording. Just darkness, altitude, and silence. An aircraft is both a target and a weapon.
To take control of MH370, one needed access to the cockpit or systems.
Pilot involvement, the easiest explanation.
Pilots had both knowledge and access.
A rogue captain could lock the co-pilot out and control the plane. Passenger sabotage, less likely but not impossible. Could a passenger with aviation or engineering expertise have gained access to systems mid-flight? Remote interference. Some propose hacking. Modern aircraft rely heavily on digital systems. If compromised remotely, the plane could have been flown off course without the pilot's control. Every possibility leaves one conclusion: whoever directed MH370 had skill, precision, and timing. In classic true crime cases, killers often fail because they leave behind physical evidence. Blood spatter, tire tracks, DNA. But MH370 left virtually nothing. The Indian Ocean became both the crime scene and the disposal site, erasing evidence with every tide. The few fragments that did wash ashore were stripped of answers, battered by months at sea, their forensic value washed away. Compare this to notorious true crime mysteries.
D.B. Cooper, 1971. A man hijacks a plane, parachutes out with ransom money, and vanishes.
No body ever found.
Amelia Earhart, 1937. A plane vanishes over the Pacific, sparking decades of speculation. The Mary Celeste, 1872. A ship found adrift with no crew, no struggle, no explanation. MH370 joins this dark lineage, a disappearance so complete that it borders on the impossible. If this was a crime, then it was unlike any the modern world has ever seen.
A hijacking with no demands. A disappearance with no ransom.
A crime without suspects, without witnesses, and without a crime scene. Perhaps the most haunting question is not how MH370 disappeared, but whether it was designed to disappear all along.
Chapter 15: The Ghosts Left Behind. The story of MH370 is not just about a missing plane. It's about the 239 souls on board and the thousands of lives shattered in its wake. Families, friends, colleagues, investigators.
All left with a haunting truth: there were no goodbyes, no graves, no answers.
For the families of those aboard MH370, grief has been frozen in time.
They live in a state psychologists call ambiguous loss. Unlike traditional mourning, where a body confirms death, ambiguous loss traps people between hope and despair.
Loved ones can't fully move on, yet they cannot hold on either.
In Beijing, relatives of Chinese passengers camped in hotels for months, demanding answers from officials. In Kuala Lumpur, vigils were held night after night, candles burning for loved ones who never came home.
Parents clutched photographs, refusing to believe their children were gone. Spouses left rooms untouched, beds unmade, waiting for a return that never came.
One mother said, "Without a body, I can't say goodbye. Every time the phone rings, I wonder if it's him."
The mystery infected the public too.
Psychologists studying MH370 have noted that unsolved tragedies trigger obsession in ways solved cases do not.
Humans crave closure. Without it, our minds invent stories to fill the void. Conspiracy theories multiply, theories clash, and suspicion thrives. Was it terrorism? Pilot suicide? Government cover-up? Or something beyond our comprehension? Every unanswered question becomes a breeding ground for paranoia.
For some, MH370 has become less a tragedy, and more a puzzle, detached from the human suffering at its core. Even the professionals were scarred.
Search crews, sonar operators, pilots, and naval officers spent years combing the ocean. Many later admitted that the emptiness haunted them.
One search commander described it like this:
"We expected to find wreckage. We found mountains, valleys, life at the bottom of the sea. Everything but the plane. Every day we hoped tomorrow would be different. Every day, it wasn't." Investigators who normally thrive on logic and order were forced to confront chaos and futility.
For some, the case remains an open wound, proof that even in the 21st century, with all our satellites and technology, a plane can vanish without a trace.
The disappearance also fractured trust in institutions. Families accused airlines and governments of hiding the truth, delaying information, and prioritizing politics over compassion. Malaysia Airlines was criticized for poor communication, releasing contradictory statements in the early days. Governments released satellite data only in fragments, fueling suspicion. To this day, some families believe officials know more than they have admitted. This erosion of trust turned MH370 into more than a tragedy. It became a symbol of secrecy and suspicion in modern times. And so, years later, the ghosts of MH370 remain. Not only the lost passengers, but the grief, anger, and obsession that their disappearance created. For the families, every sunrise is another reminder that answers may never come. For investigators, every failure to find wreckage is a scar. And for the rest of us, MH370 lingers as a chilling reminder. Sometimes, the world does not give us closure. The plane is gone. The people are gone. But the wound is still open. The mystery of MH370 is chilling enough on its own. But it becomes even more disturbing when placed alongside other disappearances in aviation history. The skies have always kept secrets, and sometimes, those secrets last for generations. The most famous case before MH370. Earhart set out to become the first woman to fly around the world. Somewhere over the Pacific, her radio fell silent. The U.S. Navy searched thousands of square miles, but no wreckage was ever found. To this day, debate rages: did she crash into the ocean, or land on a deserted island? The disappearance of MH370 destroyed more than just families emotionally, it tore apart their daily lives. Financial ruin: without death certificates, many families could not access insurance claims, pensions, or compensation. Bills went unpaid. Businesses collapsed. Children were pulled from schools. Marriages shattered. Some spouses, unable to cope with the uncertainty, walked away. Others clung even tighter, but at the cost of their own mental health. Children left adrift. For the youngest, the absence became a lifelong scar. One boy, just 8 years old when his father vanished on MH370, grew up with his family reminding him, "Your father didn't leave you. He disappeared." The tragedy did not end on March 8, 2014. It continued every day for the families left behind. As the months turned to years, many relatives began to speak openly of negligence. They accused Malaysia Airlines of failing in its duty to protect passengers. Why wasn't MH370 better tracked? Why were stolen passports allowed on board? Why was the plane allowed to vanish from radar for hours before a search began? They accused governments of betrayal. Why did it take days for officials to admit the plane had turned back? Why were families the last to know crucial details, learning from CNN or BBC before hearing it from their own governments? One widow said, "They lost my husband once in the air. Then they lost him again on the ground, in their lies." And behind every accusation was the same cry: negligence.
If officials had acted faster, told the truth sooner, or coordinated better, maybe, just maybe, their loved ones could have been found.
In the absence of truth, many turned to faith.
Christian families gathered in churches, Muslim families prayed in mosques, Buddhist and Hindu families held rituals by the sea. Some found comfort, believing their loved ones had gone to a better place. But others wrestled with their faith. "Why would God take them this way?" asked one father.
"Why give me hope every day, then snatch it away again?"
For businesses, too, MH370 cast a shadow. Airlines across the world faced nervous passengers demanding reassurance.
Tourism to Malaysia dropped sharply.
Trust in air travel itself seemed shaken.
The families of MH370 are more than victims of chance.
They are victims of uncertainty, victims of negligence, and perhaps victims of a crime still concealed.
For them, the world did not simply move on. Every unanswered question is another wound. Every false lead, another betrayal. Every year that passes, another reminder that they are trapped in a story without an ending. And until the truth emerges, the families will remain what they have been since March 2014, the living witnesses of a loss the world cannot explain, and a silence it cannot forgive. When MH370 vanished, the world responded with an operation unlike anything aviation had ever seen.
It was meant to be a demonstration of global unity, of science and technology working together. But instead, it became a sobering reminder of how fragile our certainty really is.
Within hours of MH370's disappearance, dozens of nations mobilized.
At first, the search concentrated in the South China Sea, where the plane was expected to be. Ships, helicopters, and surveillance aircraft scoured the waves, combing thousands of square kilometers.
But days later, when officials admitted the plane had turned back across Malaysia, the search shifted west into the Indian Ocean. What followed was a logistical nightmare, one of the largest and most expensive search operations in history, spanning an area the size of North America. 26 nations contributed ships, planes, and satellites.
The U.S. deployed advanced surveillance aircraft.
China sent warships and submarines.
Australia coordinated the southern search, deploying its naval fleet into remote waters it had rarely patrolled. The scale was breathtaking.
Yet, despite all this power, the ocean gave nothing back. With no wreckage, investigators turned to technology.
British satellite company Inmarsat discovered something extraordinary. The missing plane had been exchanging hourly handshakes with a satellite orbiting Earth. These faint electronic whispers, never intended for tracking, became the only clue to MH370's path. By analyzing the timing and frequency of these signals, scientists concluded the plane had flown south for hours, finally vanishing somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. It was a triumph of ingenuity, turning scraps of data into a map. But it was also a trap. The signals narrowed the search zone, yet still left an area spanning 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. The ocean floor in this region had never been properly surveyed. Search teams had to map it before they could even begin looking for wreckage. What they found was staggering. Underwater mountains taller than the Alps. Canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon. Volcanic ridges stretching across thousands of kilometers. It was a hidden world, untouched for millions of years, revealed only because a plane had vanished.
Sonar drones crisscrossed the seabed, painting it in swaths of ghostly blue.
Every blip, every shadow was investigated. Several times, search teams thought they had found wreckage only to discover rocks or shipping containers lost at sea. The ocean was mocking them, revealing everything except what they sought. By 2017, the official search had cost over $160 million.
It was the most expensive search in aviation history. And still, nothing.
In 2018, a private U.S. company, Ocean Infinity, took up the hunt on a no-find, no-fee basis. They deployed fleets of autonomous underwater drones capable of scanning more territory in months than previous teams had in years. Hope soared. But after covering another 112,000 square kilometers, Ocean Infinity 2 came up empty-handed. The ocean had swallowed MH370 whole and refused to return it. While the main wreckage evaded detection, pieces began to wash ashore.
In July 2015, a flatprint from MH370 was discovered on Réunion Island, thousands of miles from the suspected crash site.
Over the next few years, more than 30 pieces of debris were confirmed or suspected to belong to MH370, scattered across coastlines of Africa, Madagascar, and Indian Ocean islands. Each fragment was a cruel reminder, proof the plane had indeed gone down, but no closer to explaining why. The scale of the search raised darker questions.
How could such vast effort yield nothing? Were they looking in the wrong place? Was the data wrong? Or worse, had the search been deliberately steered away from the truth?
Critics pointed out that governments released satellite data in fragments, often late and contradictory. Some accused officials of intentionally misdirecting the hunt, ensuring the real crash site remained hidden.
And as costs mounted, political will faded.
By 2018, the official stance was blunt: the search would not continue unless credible new evidence emerged. The greatest aviation mystery of the 21st century was abandoned to the waves. In the end, the search for MH370 was both a triumph of human determination and a devastating reminder of our limits. Billions of dollars, years of effort, the finest technology humanity had to offer, and still, the ocean kept it secret. Perhaps, one day, new technology will pierce the depths and reveal what happened to MH370. But for now, the search stands as a haunting paradox. It uncovered the hidden face of the Earth's last frontier, but not the truth that the world sought most. The similarity to MH370 is haunting. Both flights vanished in remote oceans, leaving behind speculation instead of evidence. A U.S. military transport plane carrying 93 soldiers disappeared over the Pacific. The weather was clear, no distress call was made, and despite massive searches, nothing was ever found. Families waited for answers that never came.
Sound familiar?
Unlike the others, this case was solved, but only after years of torment. AF447 went down in the Atlantic en route from Rio to Paris. The black boxes weren't found until 2 years later, deep on the ocean floor. The delay reminds us of MH370's greatest truth: even when we think we know, the ocean can keep its silence. Each of these echoes whispers the same warning: technology may advance, but nature remains a master of disappearance. The fate of MH370 may not be unique, but it is the one that still bleeds into our present. We live in a world where people assume everything is traceable. Phones record our locations. Satellites map our movements. Cars can be located in seconds. But MH370 proved that assumption false. Civilian radar does not cover the open ocean. Planes rely on transponders, broadcasting their positions. But when MH370's transponder was turned off, it became invisible. Military radar briefly tracked it, but then, nothing. This was not a failure of a single system. It was a failure of design. Aviation had never prepared for deliberate disappearance. Every plane carries two black boxes: the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. These devices are invaluable, but they are also flawed. They do not transmit live data. Their underwater beacons last only 30 days. And if the ocean swallows them too deep, they may never be recovered. For MH370, the clock ran out before anyone even knew where to look. The faint handshakes discovered by Inmarsat were remarkable. They turned background noise into the only map of MH370's final hours. But these signals were not designed to guide a search. They were ambiguous, imprecise, and open to interpretation. The tragedy of MH370 is not just that the plane disappeared, but that in 2014, our systems were not prepared to find it. In an age where we believe the world is under constant surveillance, MH370 exposed the truth: our technology is powerful, but not infallible. When the plane slipped into silence, the world's most advanced systems slipped with it. Where light fades, shadows grow. And in the case of MH370, the shadows have multiplied into a web of theories that stretch from plausible to terrifying. One theory argues MH370 strayed into sensitive military airspace. Perhaps it was mistaken for a threat. Perhaps it was shot down. If true, governments would have every reason to cover it up. But no evidence supports this, only silence. In the early days, many assumed terrorism. After all, hijackings had defined the fears of the early 2000s. But no group ever claimed responsibility. What terrorist act goes unclaimed? This absence only deepened the mystery. As aircraft become more digital, the possibility of hacking grows. Could MH370 have been remotely hijacked? Some argue the technology exists. If so, who had the power to pull it off? The manifest listed lithium batteries, known to cause fires. But some analysts claim the cargo may have been more sensitive: military electronics,
perhaps even weapons components.
If true, the disappearance may not be an accident, but a cover-up. Each conspiracy thrives because of the void left behind. And perhaps the darkest possibility is this: MH370 may not have been an accident at all.
It may have been erased. The disappearance of MH370 did not end with its passengers. It reshaped aviation, politics, and even psychology.
Airlines began adopting real-time tracking for flights, so another MH370 would not happen. The UN's International Civil Aviation Organization mandated new safety measures, including location updates every 15 minutes. Proposals for live streaming black box data grew louder, though critics argue about cost and privacy.
Public fear. For passengers, MH370 left a shadow. Flying has always carried fear, but now, a new thought entered the collective mind: what if my plane simply vanishes? Distrust of authority. Governments handled MH370 poorly. Contradictory press releases. Withheld data. Delays in communication. Families felt betrayed, and the public grew suspicious.
Some began to believe the truth wasn't just missing, it was being hidden.
The legacy of MH370 is not just technological. It is emotional. It is cultural. It is the seed of a fear that will outlive even those who remember March 8, 2014. Time has passed. The world has moved on. But for the families of MH370, the silence never ends. Fragments of proof.
Pieces of the plane have been found: flaperons, wing parts, cabin fragments, washing ashore on distant beaches.
They confirm a crash, but they do not explain it.
Each fragment is both a relief and a torment, proof of reality, but not of cause.
Abandoned search.
The official search ended in 2018. Governments declared there was no credible new evidence. Ocean Infinity, the private company that tried one last sweep, came back empty-handed.
The ocean has decided to keep its secret. The human silence. For families, silence is worse than truth. Truth gives closure. Silence is a wound that never heals.
In Beijing, parents of lost passengers still meet to remember.
In Malaysia, wives still light candles.
In Australia, children still ask why their fathers never came home.
The silence does not just belong to the ocean. It belongs to them. And so, the story of MH370 ends not with answers, but with absence. A plane. 239 people. A decade of searching. And still, nothing.
The unknown has claimed its prize. And until the day the ocean gives up its secret, MH370 will remain where it has always been, in the silence.
Flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur carrying 239 souls, bound for Beijing. But somewhere along the journey, it stepped out of reality and into silence.
No distress call, no debris, no certainty. Only questions that deepen with each passing year.
Was it swallowed by the ocean's depths, hidden by unseen hands, or claimed by forces we cannot explain? Families still wait, oceans still guard their secrets, and the world is left to wonder. Until the wreckage is revealed, until the final black box speaks, Flight MH370 is not simply a missing plane. It has become a ghost haunting the skies, the seas, and the story of humanity itself. A reminder that some mysteries refuse to be solved. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and got something valuable or entertaining out of it. Don't forget to support the channel. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss a new upload. We are sure you liked this video. Give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps us reach more people and grow our community. Stick around, because there's plenty more exciting, inspiring, and entertaining content coming your way, just one click away. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to bring you the next video. Thank you again for being here.